Hello, my name is Todd Gordon. I'm senior planner at EPR, a planning and engineering firm in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm sorry I can't be in Bedford this evening, but I'm making this recording to present some information about work that our firm has been doing with town staff and the town's planning commission on Bedford's zoning ordinance. This presentation covers some recommended zoning revisions that we think can help fix common issues, make zoning easier for property owners, town staff, and officials, and generally bring Bedford standards up to date. Tonight is an informal presentation for residents before the Planning Commission and Town Council officially take up the recommendations and adoption of any changes. The process of updating the zoning ordinance began in 2020 when our firm completed a separate zoning ordinance review process and report. That report identified issues and made recommendations. Phase 2 of this work over the past 18 months has been to draft specific text and map revisions that implement the strategies found in the review document, bring the code into line with changes in state law, match the vision of Bedford's comprehensive plan, and incorporate specific input from town staff and from the Planning Commission. Throughout this process, we've worked very closely with staff and the Planning Commission on individual recommendations. Bedford's a great town, and at no point in this process was the idea to reinvent the town, but to make small changes that would help it function better from a zoning perspective. If you review that Phase 1 document from 2020, you'll see that it's organized around 6 big themes or goals for the future. First, streamline the zoning ordinance document for clarity and usability. 2, protect existing single-family neighborhoods. 3, activate the Centertown neighborhood. 4, stimulate residential and employment growth. 5, increase development flexibility. And 6, put less focus on individual uses and more focus on scale and character. This presentation is organized around those same 6 themes. I'll talk about the individual revisions that can be made to accomplish these 6 goals. But before we get into specifics, I realize some people know a lot about how zoning works and others may not be as familiar. So I wanted to briefly go over some background information and terms. First of all, what is zoning? Zoning is a set of regulations governing how land can and can't be used. The zoning ordinance divides the town's land into geographic areas with different rules, what uses are allowed, how tall buildings can be, and so on. Zoning is allowed under law as a way to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. Ultimately, zoning's job is to help minimize conflicts between uses, like light, noise, traffic, and more. Some important terms or concepts that will come up during this presentation. First of all, each zoning district includes a list of permitted uses and a list of conditional uses for that zone. Permitted uses, which are also sometimes called by right uses, are uses that are always allowed. You may still need to apply for a building permit and things like that, but the use is always allowed. Conditional uses, on the other hand, can be allowed, but they get additional review from the town. They may be allowed under certain conditions, like having 2 entrances or something like that. If a building or a use existed before the zoning ordinance existed, or before the rules were updated, then that use is called an existing non-conforming use. And as long as it remains actively used, it can go on, even though it may not meet current rules. Sometimes people use the term grandfathered for this sort of use. It doesn't have to be changed just because the rules have changed. Because of this, any change in the zoning regulations mainly only affects new buildings or changes in use. Another term is rezoning. You can always apply to rezone a property, that is to change it from one zone to another. There's an application process, there's a review by the Planning Commission, and a vote by the Town Council. Finally, the ordinance refers to the Planning Commission and the Town Council a lot. The town council is the elected group that ultimately approves or denies any change to zoning or any rezoning. The planning commission is appointed by the town council and hears any number of zoning issues. The planning commission makes a recommendation to the town council, who makes the final decision. As it stands, before any of these recommended changes, Bedford is divided into 18 zoning districts. The single-family residential district, R1A and R1E low-density residential districts, R2 medium density, R3 high density residential. There's the planned residential development district. There is a limited professional district, a B1 limited business district, that's the Centertown area, the B2 general business district, which is other areas including more highway commercial type use, commercial light industrial, the manufacturing district, the workplace campus district, which applies to the town's industrial park, the central neighborhood workplace district, which applies to a set of historic factory buildings, including Beal's Brewery and that area. The healthcare establishment district is a specific district that applies only to the hospital. The planned Memorial Park district, which applies only to the D-Day Memorial. There's a flood hazard district that applies to floodplains. And then there are two overlay districts. One, the traditional neighborhood overlay, which covers parts of 122 between the D-Day Memorial and Main Street, and the special corridor overlay district, which is specific to Independence Boulevard. So with that background, let's talk about potential revisions to the town's zoning ordinance. Our first goal was to streamline the zoning ordinance document for clarity and usability. So some proposed revisions. The first thing we can do is list all district information in a single place. In the current ordinance, information about individual zoning districts is found in various places, the statement of intent, what uses are permitted, building heights, and so on, meaning that you have to flip around to different pages to find the information you need. With everything in one place, we feel it'll be easier to find the important information. Similarly, we can list all of the permitted and conditional uses within each district. The existing code has a kind of a nesting feature where, for example, in the R2 district, you may be allowed A, B, and C, but also anything in the R1 district, which means you have to, again, flip back and forth to different pages to get the full picture. So we'd like everything listed in one place. Another way we can streamline the code is to create a master table of permitted and conditional uses. Listing all the uses in a chart goes a long way to helping the ordinance be easier to use, both for property owners and for town staff. The last two changes to help with clarity and usability have to do with definitions. First, we can move all the definitions in the entire ordinance into a single definition section. As it is now, some definitions are found in other districts, in the flood hazard district. So again, relocating things all to one place where people are likely to find them. Secondly, we'd like to see the ordinance provide more definitions, including defining all land uses. The existing ordinance has a definition section, but it could cover more ground just to provide more information to people who may be using the code. Our second goal was to protect existing single-family neighborhoods. A couple of proposed changes here. First of all, the first thing we notice is that there are three different R1 zones. There's the R1, R1A, R1E, and that can be a little confusing. The only actual difference between these zones is a very small difference in the size of setbacks, or how close buildings can be to the lot line. We can simplify the ordinance by combining all of those R1 districts into a single R1 district with reasonable and flexible setbacks. Keep in mind that the setbacks only apply to new construction, not any existing home. Another issue that we went over with the Planning Commission was the popularity of rooftop solar panels. These panels are more affordable now and can help homeowners with their utility bills, but under existing zoning, solar is a conditional use, meaning you have to apply to the town for permission to install them. We're recommending that rooftop solar panels that primarily serve the house that they're attached to via by right use. Any larger installation that's ground mounted or serves more than just the building that it's attached to would still be a conditional use and require an application. Our third goal was to help activate the Centertown neighborhood and make it a vibrant place for residents, visitors, and businesses. One proposed change here is to allow multifamily residential by right in the B1 zone. Multifamily includes apartments and condominiums. Right now, that sort of use is allowed conditionally. So allowing that by right may help bring more people to live downtown and in turn support businesses. Our fourth goal was to stimulate quality residential and employment growth. First, zoning needs to be up to date. Today, there are modern business types that the existing zoning ordinance just didn't consider. Modern land uses can help remove barriers to people who want to come and invest in Bedford and open new businesses. Some proposed new land uses include breweries, wineries, custom manufacturing, and hydroponic agriculture. The second recommendation here has to do with the planned residential development zone. The PRD zone is meant to allow creative master plan development proposals that don't quite fit in other zoning districts. A property owner could propose a development and work with town staff and leaders to approve the plan. Developments like Governor's Hill and Oakwood Villas are two examples of PRD projects. However, there are a lot of parcels that are zoned PRD that have no specific development plans in place. So the proposal is to remove this zone entirely and return those parcels to the R1 district. At the same time, create a new planned development district that property owners can use in the future. So on one hand, we want to add modern uses. On the other hand, we propose to remove some outdated ones. The existing ordinance includes uses like tea rooms and boarding houses that are just not commonly used terms. Again, we want the zoning ordinance to communicate clearly. Next, several residential zones give different minimum lot sizes based on whether or not the proposed house uses public water and sewer or uses individual well and septic. We would propose to remove that provision. In some cases, septic systems might still be used in the town, but in those cases, the lot size should be determined by the health department and qualified engineers rather than by the zoning ordinance to establish how much room that system needs in order to function. Goal 5 is to increase development flexibility. So make it easier for property owners to make use of their properties. To do that, we recommend adding certain light manufacturing and data center uses as conditional uses in the B2 zone. Again, that's the general business or highway commercial type zone. Second, we recommend the elimination of the traditional neighborhood overlay district. That district was originally meant as an optional alternative to underlying zoning for master plan developments. Unfortunately, it's not calibrated well to the land it actually applies to. The T&O, the traditional neighborhood overlay, only applies to projects that are 40 acres or larger, but the zone is actually applied to several much smaller parcels along 122 between the D-Day Memorial and Main Street. So a developer would have to buy multiple parcels and then assemble those parcels in order to make use of this zoning district. So as a result, this zone has never been used as it was intended. So while we've recommended rolling back the PRD and T&O zones, We certainly still support master plan development as an alternative path to the traditional zoning. So a new planned mixed development district can be a flexible alternative for property owners who want to propose creative projects that don't fit under traditional zones. Developers can request rezoning to planned mixed development, submit a master plan for potential approval. The PMD zone also includes guidance on what kinds of projects the town is looking for, including density, requirements for open space, mix of uses, and so on. Another modern use that the Planning Commission considered in this process is short-term residential rentals. That is, things like Airbnb and similar websites or apps. In this case, we're using the umbrella term homestays to cover those uses. We are recommending that homestays be allowed by right in commercial zones and only allowed with a conditional use permit in residential zones. That is, in the residential zone, you would have to apply and be approved by the town. We've also drafted special provisions for homestays that include requirements that owners register with the town, pay occupancy taxes the same way a hotel would, provide parking, limit the number of guests, and so on. There's also a process included there for the revoking of homestay registration if violations of the rules occur. Next, we have some recommended changes to the limited professional district, that is the LP. As it is, this zone is meant to provide a transition between residential and the B1 zone in the center town. By allowing residential, but also some certain office uses. Right now, the LP zone only exists on paper. There are no parcels that are actually zoned LP. Also, as it applies now, it only includes existing buildings, so no new buildings are allowed for commercial use in the LP. So we would like to propose to change that and allow new buildings. The change would allow new construction for certain commercial uses and kind of fill out that LP zone. Finally, goal number 6 was to put less focus on individual uses and more focus on scale and character. We can do that in several ways, one of which is to group retail and service uses into broad commercial retail and commercial service categories. The existing code includes longer lists of individual retail uses like bookstores, jewelry stores, clothing stores, and so on. That isn't really necessary. And no matter how long the list, you'll still miss certain business types. We've also proposed some revisions to the sign regulations. First, to provide a total budget of sign area based on the zoning district and the building frontage that we think is easier to understand overall. Second, to remove content-based sign regulations. For example, allowing gas station signs to be one size and real estate signs to be another size. Recent Supreme Court decisions have made content-based sign regulations illegal as a violation of the First Amendment. So we certainly need Bedford to be in coordination with overall law. The zoning code also contains some special provisions, that is, additional requirements and guidance for certain uses. For example, rules for keeping chickens, rules for mobile home parks are all included in special provisions. As of now, some special provisions are kind of scattered throughout the document. The recommendation is to consolidate all of those into a single article. That's Article 8. We've also recommended some new special provisions with information on accessory dwelling units, drive-throughs, homestays, and the outdoor display of retail products. Finally, under the existing code, some districts don't have any requirements for lot size, lot coverage, or setbacks. Those include the LP, B1, B2, CLI, M1 and Central Neighborhood Workplace, there are just no requirements that are ever listed. We recommend some reasonable regulations to include in those zones to give direction to potential investors, property owners, where no dimensions were previously given. And as with the permitted and conditional uses, we've created a chart to display dimensional requirements in a simplified form that we think helps the ordinance to be a little better understood. To go along with the zoning text recommendations we've just discussed, there were also some changes proposed to the zoning map, that is, in which zoning district individual parcels are placed. We've used this process in some cases to suggest other map changes. You should have printed versions of the zoning map in the room with you for you to inspect, and that'll be probably the best way for you to see that. But I'll cover some of the highlights of the map revisions here. First, we talked about the elimination of the PRD district and changing parcels zone PRD back to R1. The PRD would still be maintained on certain parcels that have active PRD development plans like Governor's Hill and Oakwood Villas, but the map is revised to show R1 zoning on those parcels. Secondly, we talked about removing the T&O designation. And so we show a map revision, removing the overlay and leaving those properties just as the underlying zoning shows. T&O would be maintained on a few parcels that have approved T&O uses now. Next, we proposed to map certain select parcels into the LP district. Again, that's the district that exists and is meant to be a transition into the B1 Centertown zone, but no properties are currently mapped LP. So we have some parcels that we'd like to suggest be mapped to LP to form that transition between zones. We proposed to revise parcels in the area of Maxwell Circle from the current M1 designation to CLI. That's the light industrial. That would better accommodate nearby residential uses. So that works with uses that are on the property now, but eliminates the potential for serious industry and manufacturing in an area where there are homes very nearby. We also show a revision to parcels in the area of Rough Drive and Earnhardt Drive, as well as Macon Street, from M1 or B2 to residential. That's R1 residential, because that's the use that's there now. So we want the map to reflect existing use of those parcels. Finally, the town code requires that newly incorporated parcels all be zoned R1. So for the July 2023 reversion, where the town incorporated new parcels, the draft map shows the required R1 zoning district now, as opposed to the county zoning that was previously on those parcels. But we also show some select changes to accommodate existing uses. So that includes areas along 221 and Forest Road that are shown as low intensity non-residential districts, CLI and LP, to allow residential and commercial uses that minimize non-conformity of uses. So we want to allow businesses that are going on in those areas to have zoning that fits the character of their business so they can continue. Other areas of that where reversion parcels are shown with new zoning. So for the Harmony development, showing an applied PMD to incorporate the development plans that apply on that parcel as well. So again, these maps should be in the room with you, and you can have a closer look at those. With all of that, I want to thank you for listening to this presentation. I realize this is a lot of information and that zoning can be a bit technical, but it's an important way to plan for the health, safety, and generally prosperous future of Bedford. So I thank you very much for listening. And I believe staff should be in the room for additional questions and discussion. Thank you all very much again.